I'm going to talk today about maintainable JavaScript applications, and I'm going to talk about how to build them. So first, about me. My name is Marius Gundersen. I work as a consultant for a company called Cyber here in Oslo. I do mostly front-end development, web development, and some mobile stuff. But for the past year or so, I've been working with Komplett. Raise your hand if you know Komplett. Yeah, so Scandinavians know that Komplett is probably Norway's largest e-commerce site. They sell a lot of computers and electronics, and they've been around since 1996. Now, the site is kind of old, so they need some help getting it more modern, working on tablets, and getting some more JavaScript into it. And so that's what we've been helping them with. Now, when we've been doing that, we've been trying to make an application which is maintainable. So that's what I want to talk about today. How we built the applications at Komplett and how I think JavaScript applications should be built. So the question we have to start with is, what is maintainable code? Now I believe this is a really good answer. Programming is the art of explaining to other people through code what you want the computer to do. Explaining to a computer what you want it to do, that's pretty simple. The computer has a compiler, a debugger, and we have automated tests that will all tell you if you're not explaining it correctly. But there are no automated tests about explaining to other people and to check if they understand what you're trying to do. Now this is important because we spend most of the time reading code, not writing it. And so for every line of code that you want to write, you have to read 100, maybe even 1,000 lines of code. And this is code that's spread across many files written by multiple people over the span of several years. And after you read all of that, you have to understand it. And only then can you start programming. So, with all this code that you read, it gets complicated. And so to make a code or a program maintainable, you should make it so that you have to read less code. And the code you actually have to read is easier to read. If you can make applications with less code to read and the code that you have to read is easy to read or understand, then it gets simple to add new features or to debug it or fix problems. It's important to understand that this does not mean that we should write less code or that the code should be easy to write. Just because you have to write a lot of code does not mean that you have to read a lot of code. Sometimes writing more code can result in having to read less code. So, at the end of the day, we want to make an application where we can have other people come in and help us with it, and they can start programming immediately. And this means that even if we go away for a couple of days, for example, to a conference in Oslo, by the time we get back to the program we've been working on, we can look at it and immediately start working again. We don't have to read everything and try to understand it again, because it's simple to understand it. And this is what I want to look at today. Now, to do that, we're going to build an application. We're going to build a really simple one. Let's see if I have internet now. Yes, we do. So this is what we're going to make. This is a simple bookmarking application. I can enter a bookmark here. And you saw I had validation. And we have a small preview link. You can save it to list, hopefully. Okay. And then when we saved it, we can filter it here. If it had showed up, which it didn't. Oh, there we go. So now we can filter it. If you type something else, it disappears. This is what we want to build today. And we're going to build it the same way we've been building code at Komplett. So we're going to use MVVM to bind JavaScript and HTML together. We're going to use modular JavaScript, and we're going to automatically load the modules that we need for the application. Then we're going to use events to communicate between different modules. And finally, we're going to look at some communication, how we can communicate with the server, passing data back and forth. To do this, I have a small framework, or collection of framework, which I've called Ordnung. And for those of you who know German, they know that this means systematic and orderly. And that's what I hope the application will be, or the code in the application. And that will be easy to understand it. Now we're going to use a couple of frameworks for this. We're going to start with Knockout. Raise your hand if you've worked with Knockout before. Okay, a couple of people. And then we're going to look at Require. Raise your hand if if you work with that, a lot more. And then we have a couple of things that we made at Komplett. We have a loading script. We have a publish subscribe system called proclaim when. And then we have something called QVC, which is what we're going to look at towards the end. I want to start with Knockout. Knockout is a really, really cool application or framework. We don't have time to look at all of it. It's pretty big, but it's kind of similar to Angular, which we saw yesterday. So we can look at a small part of it, and then you'll see how similar it is to Angular. Now with Knockout, we can create MVVM code. That is model, view, view model. The model part of this code is JSON, and it lives on the server. And so we can get that using Ajax to transfer it from the server. And we don't really need that at the beginning of this application, so we're going to look at that towards the end. What we're going to start looking at is the view and the view model. The view is written in HTML and has bindings, so we can bind the JavaScript in the view model to it. There's a fourth part, which is the knockout. This is what binds the JavaScript and the HTML together. So this is what we're going to start with. We have some HTML over here, which defines the create bookmark entry form here. And then you see we have an input field for title, for the URL, a link, which will contain a preview, and a button. Now at the bottom, you can see that we load 3 scripts. We need knockout, we need a view model, and then we need something to join everything together. So we start looking at the view model. This is just a constructor function in JavaScript. And we're going to need some fields in this one. So we're going to start by adding a title field. We're going to use observables. This is from Knockout. This just means that this variable can change, and when it changes, the HTML will change as well. And we can change, do the same thing for the URL. And then we need a function to create a bookmark. So let's log that the bookmark has been created. So this is all we need to create a view model. We now have a place to store the title and URL, and we have a function which does something, nothing useful. But to get this to work, we need to bind this to the DOM. So we need to create an instance of that view model. We do this using new view model, and then we can bind it using the ko apply bindings. This view model is now bound to the HTML, and then now we can use it by creating declare the bindings. So we have this input here, and we can specify that we want to bind the value of this one to the title. We can also say that we want it to update every time we press a key. This means that in this anchor tag down here, we can now say we want to bind the text to the same variable, the field. So now, when I type something here, maybe I should refresh it. There we go. When I type something here, it shows up immediately. There's not any JavaScript at all. We just define the field and everything works. So we can do the same thing for the URL. We can bind the value here to the URL, tell it to update after every key. And then we can bind down here the attribute called href to URL. So now we can type something here, rebels, and you can maybe tell in the bottom corner that the URL is correct. The final thing we need for this to work is to handle a click event on this button. You could use the same thing, data bind click, create bookmark. So now when I click on this one, there we go, we get the log event saying that bookmark has been created. Now already we have something which is pretty cool. What we have is declared the bindings. So this means that the HTML controls what it does. We don't have any JavaScript which controls the HTML for us. And that means that we can look at the elements and we can immediately tell what they're supposed to do. And we also know that they're not going to do something else because we don't have it in the other library. So, for example, this button, we know that the text is never going to change on this button because there's no binding here, which tells us that the button's going to change text. And that means it's very easy to look at the HTML and understand what it's supposed to do. And this is important when you create a maintainable application. You want to have to read as little code as possible, and that's exactly what we have here. So let's look at something else. Let's look at Require.js. Require.js is a library for creating asynchronous module definitions. That means that we have modules which can be loaded asynchronously, and they contain some code. It also means that we can explicitly define the dependencies of that code. So for example, we had in our application, we needed Knockout. So now we can create a module which tells us that we need Knockout. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to define a new module here. Yes, go away. And this module... sorry, yes. There, is it better? Thank you for telling me. So we created a module here. And we're going to tell it that we need this KO variable. So we can do that by saying load Knockout for us. So now the KO variable is defined. In this file, we need both the view model and KO. So we can say that we require Knockout, and we require create bookmark VM. And so now, both of these variables are defined inside this function. This means that on this page, right at the bottom, we had the script tags. We can now get rid of these. We don't need to load them. They're automatically loaded for us. The only thing we need now is that require script. So let's get that, require.js. And then we're going to tell it, the first thing to do is to load this main.js file. So we tell it that the data main is that main.js file. So now things should work. We got an error, so okay, somewhere in main we have... yes, forgot the end of this one. That's what happens when I zoom in. And again. Yes, I forgot one thing. We have to return something from this one. Now things should be working. Yes, there we go. So now we have exactly the same thing we had before. We can enter something here. But we don't have to add any script files to the bottom of our HTML. And that's good. So with modules, we now have encapsulated the functionality that we need, and we can tell which dependencies we want this one to load. This means that we don't have to add these script files to the end of the HTML manually. They're loaded for us. And this is important for testing. It means that we can now test one module on its own without having to worry about all the other modules. If that module needs something, it will get it for us. And if we don't want it to get that module, we can mock it out and get it to load something else. The result is that it's very easy to understand the JavaScript. We can understand one JavaScript file at a time without having to worry about the rest. There's one problem though. This main JavaScript file loads the correct view model. It would be much better if this HTML loaded the correct view model for us. So that's what we're going to look at now. Yes, that's what I said. We can fix this. We can let the HTML decide what view model to load. So the way we're going to do that is going to specify in this div that we need the view model called create bookmark view model. So now we're going to load this view model for only this div. And so we don't need to load Knockout. We don't need to load the create bookmark view model. All we need, all we need now is a small script called loader. So That's a simple function called load. And so we tell Ordnung, yes, thank you. Yep, thank you. And so now this load function is going to look through our HTML, find all these data view models, and load the correct thing for us. So now we can enter, yes, another bookmark. Now, this is really powerful. It means that you can look at the HTML and immediately tell what it's supposed to do. So before we knew what an element was supposed to do, but now we can also find which JavaScript file that function or field is in. So for example, if you take this file, this is something that somebody else wrote. We didn't write it, but we're going to use it. So we have a filter here, the same as we have the same input type field. And how does this work? Well, we can look in the HTML. We see that the value is bound to filter. Filter is in the filter bookmark view model. We look here, and there we find it. It's an observable. So this means that it's really easy to look at some HTML that somebody else wrote and immediately tell how it's supposed to work. So what we can do now is that we can combine these two. We can take this HTML, copy it, paste it into this one. And now we have both of them running on the same page. We didn't have to add any JavaScript. We didn't have to configure any JavaScript. We can enter something here, a new bookmark, and we can filter bookmarks down here. And everything's just working just the way it did when it was in separate files. This is incredibly powerful. We've been building some applications, and we have many of these view models on the page, and we just keep adding them everywhere we need it. This means that we can structure our application by combining several of them. So for example, if we take Twitter, we see that we can just keep adding new view models to different parts of the page, and they're completely separate. So the search view model doesn't need to know that there's a who to follow view model, and doesn't need to know how it works. But there's one problem. These are completely independent. So we saw that we could add a bookmark, and we can filter bookmarks, but there's no way to get a bookmark into the filter bookmark list. So how do we do that? Well, we can use events. So we're going to look at the pub subsystem. This means that we have events that we can publish, and then subscribers will react to it. These are not DOM events. This is not like an on-click event. This is something completely different. And an event system consists of 3 parts. We have the event that we want to send to other people, and that event sometimes has parameters that we want to pass along. We also have a subscriber that's going to react to the event and do something with it. And we have the publisher, which publishes the events, triggering all the other subscribers to react to it. So let's start by defining an event. So we're going to return something. We're going to return an extended object. So the first event we want is that a bookmark has been created. So let's create that one. A bookmark has been created. Now this is going to be a function, and it's going to take 2 parameters. It's going to take the title and the URL. And we don't actually want this function to do anything, because we want the subscribers to do something. But we have a definition now for a function, for an event, and we have a place to look it up in the event.js file. So a couple of words about event naming. It's very important that your events describe what has happened, not what you want to happen. It's very tempting to name this event add bookmark to list, because that's what we want. But the thing is that events can be subscribed to by many subscribers, and now you don't know which ones are going to subscribe to it or how many. And if you describe what you want to happen, you only describe what one of them is supposed to do. So instead of doing that, we describe what has happened, a bookmark has been created, and we leave it up to the subscribers to decide what to do with that information. So we can look at the subscriber. Let's look at this bottom part, the filter bookmarks view model. So for this to work, it has a dependency, which is the event. And we're going to load it, and we're going to call it when. This means that at the bottom here, we can say when a bookmark has been created, we wanted to add bookmark to list. That's this function which is run to add these 3 bookmarks. And so the next thing we need after adding the subscriber is the person who's triggering an event. So once again, we need a dependency to the event, events. And now, in this create bookmark function, we can proclaim that a bookmark has been created. And we're going to use the title and the URL. So this means that when we run this function, it's going to proclaim that a bookmark has been created. The view model here is going to react to it, and it's going to add the bookmark to the list of bookmarks. So if I add something here, let's add Google, GDP, create it, and there we go. We got a log event as well. So now we have multiple view models on the same page, and they can communicate with each other through events. Okay. There you go. So something cool here is that we can now see what the public interface of a view model is, because that's the event it's going to subscribe to. None of the other functions in that view model can be called from outside the HTML that the view model controls. So we know that the only thing it can react to is those events. And it's very easy to look at it and understand how it's going to react to other things. It also means that we have nothing global in the application controlling everything. We can create multiple of those events.js files, which has events in them, and we can subscribe to many different ones and have dependencies to many different ones. So let's look at something completely different. QVC is a way to communicate with the server. Now raise your hand if you use jQuery Ajax to communicate with the server, and if it's a REST API. So I think that's most people. But at Komplett we used a different system, because we based it on something called CQRS and a specific framework called Bifrost. And in CQRS, you have only 2 ways to communicate with the server. You can either query it for information, or you can command it to do things. Now, command is when you tell the server to do something, and you expect the server to react. This means that the command has side effects. Now, a command cannot return results. To get some information back from the server, you have to query it for information. And when you query it for information, you don't want it to have any side effects, which means that you can query it multiple times without changing any state on the server. So let's look at a command. We're going to look at a command for creating the bookmark. And before we do that, we have to set something up. We have to include QVC here. And then we have to configure it. So QVC config. We're going to set the base URL. So this is a one-time thing. Once this is done, you can reuse this main.js file all over your site, and everything's been set up for you. So now, in this view model, we can load QVC the same way. And then, instead of having a function for creating the bookmark, we're going to create a command. So create command. Now this only creates a command for us. To execute a command, we call it just like a normal function without any parameters. So this is going to send something to the server. Now we need to tell the server which command we want to execute. So let's add a bookmark. We also need to send some data to the server. So we're going to send the title. I'm going to send the URL. And finally, we want something to happen if this command successfully executes. So on success, we want it to call this function, which means that we're going to add the bookmark to this list as well. And yes, thank you. So now we can create a bookmark. I'm going to use Google again. When we create it, yes, there we go. This means that the command successfully executed. So there's something running on the server here. I'm going to dive into some server code. Now this is Java. It's running on a Tomcat server, and that's probably the most enterprise code you're going to see here these 2 days. We have a simple servlet which sets up some routing. It's not terribly interesting. We have a collection of bookmarks in a bookmark collection. And then we have an add bookmark command. This looks very similar to what we had on the client. It has the same name, and it has the same 2 fields, the title and the URL. So when we execute the command, an instance of this class is going to be created. And then we have a handler. And this one has a method for handling add bookmark commands. And all it does is add a new bookmark to the bookmark collection. So when you create a command on the client now, it's very easy to look on the server and see how that command is going to work and what that command actually does on the server. They have the same name and they have the same schema, the same parameters. We can create a query the same way. So let's create a get all bookmarks query. It's going to be, there we go. And so this query is going to get us all the bookmarks we need. It doesn't need any parameters, because we just want everything from the server. So once we created this one, the only thing we need to do now is add a handle function. So we can handle get all bookmarks query. And so what we want to return is a list of bookmarks. There we go. So this is going to return a list of bookmarks for us. And so this is all we have to do on the server to create a new query or a new command. So on the client now, in this filter bookmarks view model, we have to include QVC the same way. And we're going to define this function. This.get bookmarks is equal to QVC create query. Now this query didn't take any parameters, so we don't need to pass anything to the server. We're going to tell it to put the result into this bookmarks variable, which you can see is the same thing that was used in that bookmark function. So the final thing we have to do now is get rid of these. And we can now call this function, this.get bookmarks. And that will get us other bookmarks. So we need to add something to the server for this to work. We create a bookmark. There we go. If we refresh the page now, it should... No, it didn't. Haha. The server should restart automatically, hopefully. It should, yes. Let's try adding it again. A better bookmark, maybe. Spelled correctly. So let's create it. And if we refresh it, no, it didn't. Okay, so I've screwed up somewhere. Yeah, the bit logging out. Yes. So I don't know what I've done. Something made some mistake. But we can move on, because this is really everything's breaking now. Yes. Okay. So a summary about commands and queries. As I said, we now have a single way to communicate with the server across our site, if it would have worked. The interface for creating command and query is very easy, and we can look up on the server how that command and query is supposed to work. And because the commands and queries are supposed to be simple, we're not going to send a lot of data. We can capture the intent of that command and query in the name. So we had one which was create bookmark, and that's all it does. Now one which gets all the bookmarks, and that's all it does. This means that it's very simple to understand the communication with the server. Now we skip the V in QVC, and V is for validation. All data from the client has to be validated. So we're going to look at a simple way to validate the data from the server. So the way we're going to do that is, in this add bookmark command, we're going to say that this title cannot be empty. Same thing for this URL. So if you go to the client now, we can add validation messages. Validation message for title. We can do the same thing for the URL. So now we've added some validation messages to the server. Do I have an error again? Okay. Huh. It shouldn't have anything to do here, I think, but I could try it. No, because it worked, it executed. I don't know what happened here. So we're going to do the debugging using binary search. I'm going to remove more and more code and see what's going to make it work again. Huh. So something else is broken. Oh, yes, okay, so I know what's made a mistake. Of course, we're not going to execute this. That's better. So let's add this one. Yes, so this is probably why it didn't work earlier. But now we've set everything up. So if I try to create a bookmark now, we get a validation message. So it's pretty simple. It says that it cannot be empty. But what's more important is that if I start typing something here, the validation message disappears. And if I clear this, it reappears. So what's actually happened here is that the validation rules on the server are actually sent to the client, and they're applied to the observables. So I can create a more complex one on the server. I can say that I want a pattern. Let's include this one, where I'm saying that it has to start with HTTP. And so now on the client, if I refresh it, and I start typing something here, after the server has refreshed, there we go. So it now says that, okay, yes, this regular expression has to validate. And the moment it does, it disappears. And so this means that we have the same validation rules on the server and on the client, and they're automatically applied to the view model. So it means that the messages appear instantly. This makes it really simple to create interfaces with the server. You create a command or query on the server, you define some view models on the client, and which one you want to communicate with, and then everything else is done for you. Yes, and as I said, both the constraints are run both on the server and on the client. So now we've created a pretty simple application. We can create bookmarks, they're validated before they're sent to the server, they're validated on the server, they're added to a list on the server, and we should be able to get them from the server and filter it. And what's more important is that we have something which is pretty easy to reason about. We can look in the HTML and instantly tell how it works. So for example, this button, we saw that it's connected to a click event, which is in the create bookmark JavaScript file. You can look it up and find it. Yes, there we go. What's more important is that we made something completely without jQuery. jQuery code isn't terribly maintainable. You have some HTML, and then you have some jQuery in another file, which controls it, and it's impossible to find out which JavaScript file is actually controlling the HTML. you can have multiple HTML files controlling the same element, and the only way to find out is to look through all of the JavaScript files that you have loaded into the DOM. So I think that's it for me. If you have any questions, fire away. Yes. I think there's a question over there. First one. Okay, yes.
Okay, how do you test this?
Okay, so thank you. I want to talk about testing, but I didn't really have time. The thing is that we now have a view model in a module. So we can use that one, we can require it in our test, and test that module on its own. And we can test it completely without testing the HTML. So the thing is that the HTML is very simple. It's only bound to the view model, so there's no need to test the HTML. And that means that we can completely test the view model on its own. And that works very, very well. Answer the question? Yep. So, yes.
So you used the AMD module pattern in these projects. I'm just wondering why you did it and what your thoughts are on the common.js module pattern.
So we used AMD because that's what we've been using before. It also means that we can load new modules anytime we need. So for example, you saw when we got the constraint from the server, we added a pattern constraint. We sent that to the client, and then the client could dynamically load the pattern module using AMD. And you can't do that with the common.js. You need to load everything up front, as far as I know. Okay? Yep. Another question? Yes?
Yep. If I understood correctly, with your magic loader, if you have 5 or 6 or 7 different modules,
yep.
And do they load all their own JavaScript files? Like, will that be 7 requests to the server? Because that would be a killer on mobile.
If it's 7 different view models, then we'll load 7 times, yes. But you can use the required optimizer to combine all of the view models you have on a page into a single file and pass that to the client. And so now you have it in memory before you start loading. And so require won't actually go to the server. It knows that that module has already been loaded. So yes, you can get around having to do 7 requests to the server. I think there was a question over here on the left side. Okay. Yes, in front end.
Thanks. That was a great presentation. I was wondering, have you made any thoughts about whether it is a good idea to use CQRS for client-server communication, seeing as how it generally tends to lead to more requests and more queries than using specialized optimized queries?
Okay.
In terms of round-trip times for mobile devices and so on.
Yes, okay. So the application we made most heavy use of commands and queries, that was an admin panel. So we didn't really care about that. And that worked very well. So we could now create very small queries to get only the information we were interested in. And that worked fine. I think it depends on the application you're making. If you have a mobile application which is going to do many small requests, maybe there's a better way to do it. But yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it could be an issue. Yep.
I'm wondering, what if you have nested models?
Okay, so we can create nested modules. That's not really a problem. So if instead of having this data view model here, we can take this one and put it inside this one. And so now instead of seeing data view model, we can bind this one using the with. So to get this to work, we now have a dependency here on the filter bookmarks VM. And we can say that this .filter VM is equal to new filter VM. So now it should work the same way as before. Sorry. And if we create it, yeah, it shows up. So yeah, you can have nested view models.
Can you actually get in control of the elements in terms of user interaction? Like, what if I want more than just show and hide elements when validating stuff? that's a problem I see with stuff like AngularJS as well. So I feel like there's a lot of implied logic, but I lose control of element and user interaction.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, you can have more control. So, for example, everything I'm showing here is made the same way. So we can, for example, look at how that this editor works. It's using, so if we try to find it, there you go. This one is using data-bind editor. So I created a custom binding called editor, which puts the editor into the view for me. And that's now a much more advanced binding than the other ones I showed you. But that means that you can create custom bindings which does really advanced stuff for you. And yeah, so that probably solves that problem. So, yeah.
That was it. Thank you.
Okay.